because mine defaults to the cloud, but.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, yay, we get to talk about books. I'm Mrs. Meschter, librarian at Chinook.
And I'm Ms.McSheehy from Evergreen High School.
And I'm Ms. Azelle from Sylvester, and this is our favorite thing to do, so just bear with us. But today we're going to talk about comfort books, and Ms. Meschter, this was your idea, so why don't you give us a little heads up on comfort books?
Yeah, so at first I was like, oh, let's talk about books that are like a warm hug, or, books that make you feel comforted. So I think just like comfort food is very personal. I think there's a lot of personal things for comfort book, like what makes you feel relaxed or escaped or taken care of. Or so for some people, that could be something like a puzzle or nonfiction, but other people, it could be, your favorite book over and over and over again. Like when I was in middle school, I read the Anne of Green Gables series all the time. Like I'd read it like back, the cover to cover, like back to back. That is for me a comfort book, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a comfort book for other people, right?
But I think that's an excellent example of a comfort book, though, because the Anne of Green Gables series is just, it is a warm hug, but I know what you're saying. And Ms. McSheehy, we were talking about this a little before we were recording, right? It's hard to find a warm hug book in YA because a lot of them deal with what, teens are going through, which is frustration and stress and concern about the world. But for some people, that is a comfort book. I remember when the pandemic started, someone mentioned to me that they were reading all the dystopian novels, and I couldn't go there, but it brought her a strange sense of relief. And for me, it's just like more anxiety.
Yeah, and the more I was thinking about it, the more I realized that maybe those books that are dealing with heavy topics can be a comfort, because whether they're teens or other people, other protagonists, they overcome, they manage to go beyond what society expects from them. And so that can often be reassuring and comforting. So I kind of rethought about what is a comfort book. It doesn't have to be necessarily something that's light, because in the end, you'll see the resilience, which can be comforting.
Yeah, except for me, I can't go there. I have to go for light or silly or something that is escapist. So just because of the state of the world, I avoid the dystopian, and I love a good dystopian book. Don't get me wrong. I love a dark, dark book, but in my worst days, I'm reading like the Mo and Dale mysteries. Are you guys familiar with those?
Tell us more.
Sheila Turnage wrote these books that have Mo, her name is Moses because she was found in this small town in North Carolina, floating down the river in a basket. And she, what's that?
3 Times Lucky?
3 Times Lucky is the first one in the series, and they solve mysteries. It's kind of like a Scooby-Doo-esque thing. She and her best friend Dale, it's not Earnhardt, but it's something like that. The third, they solve mysteries together. They're 6th graders, I believe, and but the town is so quirky and silly, and so are all the people who live there. And it's just very calming to me. And my daughter and I loved reading them together. She's probably moved on. She's a little older now, but I haven't. I'm never old enough or too old to read these.
Ms. McSheehy, have you read 3 Times Lucky?
Yes.
So it's a lot like Gilmore Girls.
I never thought of it that way. That's a great analogy.
And you just kind of want to hang out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, definitely that's a comfort type book, I would think. But I just read like a romantic fantasy, but heavy on the romance, light on the fantasy, which is not my normal genre. Normally I'm a dystopian or like a thought-provoking fantasy reader, but that like super escapist, light and fluffy, just like felt good in my brain. So I just read The Wicked Kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
Just nice and cotton candy for my brain, like a hug.
Same reaction. And in fact, that's kind of the one that kind of jump started me when I was going through a little reading slump. I'm like picking up all my normal, again, like a darker fantasy book kind of things, and they're just not sticking. And then it was romance, but disguised as YA. And it just was so easy to read. I felt so relaxed, even though there are witches and demons.
I couldn't tell if it was set in the 1800s or now.
Because nobody was calling for help on their cell phones, I just in my mind was like, oh, it must be an earlier time period.
But then she was like drinking it by herself at a restaurant. At like midnight, and I was like, "What time period is this?"
Alternate history.
And I was just like, "But this is what makes it comforting, right?" Like, I'm like total belief is suspended, and I'm just like, "Yeah, this is lovely."
So I have been actually doing a lot of crossword puzzles. And my library tech, Kate, still gets the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
So she cuts out, you probably can't see them.
There you go. Oh, right in front of your face. Oh, no, it's gone again.
Anyway, she cuts out crossword puzzles for me. And I have a stack here, and when I need that kind of escapism, but I can't sit down and really get into a book, I will do a crossword puzzle. I also do the New York Times MIDI crossword puzzle on my phone and the Atlantic on my phone. just the mini ones, because they're kind of quick. And although I have been reading a book, The How and the Why by Cynthia Hand, and it's not dealing with like, it doesn't have anything to do with the pandemic or racial injustices, social justice issues, but it goes back and forth in time about a girl who is adopted. And she is almost 18, and she is starting to be curious about her birth mom. And then it goes back in time to when her birth mom was 16, and she was sent to a home through her pregnancy, and she's told to write letters to her unborn child. And she doesn't really want to write the letters. She thinks this is stupid, but she ends up writing several. And so it's these two stories, one of the girl who is wanting to know more about her birth mom, and then the actual birth mom when she was pregnant. And so it's just a really interesting look at teen pregnancy, but also adoption and teens who have been adopted and are curious about their origin, what was going on in their mother's mind and life during that time. So that's been a bit of an escapist read for me. I really like it. It's not really heavy. It takes place in Idaho, so it's in the Pacific Northwest, which is kind of nice. And
yeah, that's nice. I mean, and kudos for you for picking a book that kind of has a sort of back and forth, in different times narrative, because some people don't find that relaxing. Some of my favorite books are like that. Like, I mean, we've in Zooming with a librarian talked about Possession by AS Byatt, which is an adult book, but just one of the most English major geeky romance, lovely historical, part of it's historical, part of it's set in modern times, but something just very comforting about that if you like that. And we have some students who are very much into like Jane Austen and some of the classical sort of romance, and this would be a nice fit for them, but that sort of alternating sort of narrative sometimes is hard for some people to get into.
Well, what I find is that I actually look forward, like it's, by chapter, I look forward to when there's going to be another letter from the mom,
Yeah.
Um,
And epistolary novels do like read a little faster, I think.
Yes.
A lot of our students love The War That Saved My Life
mhm.
and books similarly written. But can I guys tell you a terrible thing? It still upsets me to this day. I worked with a librarian, and there's a lovely, again, it's an adult book, but I think our young adults could handle it. It's a lovely book that does the sort of jumping back and forth, and I believe it's through letters, called The Conjurer's Bird, and it's kind of amazing, because it goes back to the first voyage of, I think it's Darwin, looking for evidence of evolution and everything, but then there's something going on in the present day, people who are like researching it, and there's a little romance and it's sweet. Well, I worked with a librarian who could not stand non-linear novels, so she read all the one story first and then went back and read all the other story, and I was just like, no, that's not how the author wanted you to read it. Why would you do it that way? But it worked for her, so but it still bothers me.
You would know half the story.
Thank you.
It's like reading two different books.
Yeah, just really irked me. Librarian problems, right?
When we have students who come in and tell us that they want like a mystery novel, I actually think sometimes they want this nonlinear narrative because it feels like a mystery. How is it unfolding? How do these connect?
Right.
How do these intertwine? But I have to say, I am somebody who reads the end of a book first.
Yes.
I lose all my librarian cred right there. But
how did you do that with Holes? Because the beautiful part of Holes is getting to the end and seeing how it all weaves back together again.
Really, I'm like, if I don't care about the ending, I'm like, why do I care about getting there?
All right, friends, this recording is over. We have to have a big debate.
Ms. Meschter is no longer a librarian. I'm sorry. No, but also in that same vein of crossword puzzles, I actually love reading cookbooks. Like,
nice.
Really? I hate to cook. So
reading cookbooks and cooking are not the same thing. Just like collecting craft supplies and actually crafting. No, but I like reading cookbooks because they're short, right? Like it's just the recipe, and then you're like, you can go on or not. And sometimes it sparks my creativity, and I'm like, oh, now I think I'm going to go cook something. And sometimes I'm like, I read a book. It was a cookbook, but I read it, and I'm good. But
Ms. Meschter, do you like books that are like sometimes they're usually mysteries that have like the recipes throughout them?
Yes. Yeah,
they're fun.
No, I love this, but I like to cook, but I have been struggling with cooking this whole time. Like it feels like just one more stressor in my life that I'm like, so this past week I'm just needing a lot of extra comfort. So I'm like, ooh, maybe I need some soup. What soup recipes can I make? Maybe I need like, yeah, I've just been reading them. Not that I've been cooking them, I've been reading them. So
okay, so do you look at recipes online, or does it need to be like an actual book?
Actual book, because I'm struggling with the online thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I just downloaded an ebook that I'm like looking at it going, but it's an ebook and I don't want to read on my device anymore. But I mean, I could get it right away from the library. It's Ahsoka, the Star Wars novel, because Star Wars is very much a comfort thing for me.
Very cool.
So,
No, Star Wars is comforting because it's these are characters we know and we love and we're familiar with. And
when I was sick growing up, like whenever we had a sick day, my mom would go to the video store and rent Return of the Jedi.
what is this video store you speak? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So she would rent Return of the Jedi. And so it's like super, not only is it just near and dear characters, but like I think I could tell you verbatim the entire script of the movie, right? Like I know it very intimately, and it's just
Well, it's
like
Ewoks.
friends. It's Ewoks. It's book friends.
That is a warm hug, an Ewok.
Right. I need an Ewok in my life. Actually, my dog's face looks kind of like an Ewok. So.
That's
so along those same lines of a cookbook is I got a book for Christmas, and it's called The Flower Workshop.
Ooh.
And so I planted this new garden in the fall, and I'm so excited for things to grow. And so this is all about arrangements and really using a lot of natural things that you find in your own backyard. So, and then adding flowers to it. So like branches and twigs and things like that. So it's sort of like a recipe, but, and it gives you like different options. Like if you don't have this certain branch or foliage, you can substitute it for something else. And so that helps me, and I start dreaming about, you know, things that are growing and sun, and you know what it might be like with the pandemic in the springtime. Maybe it will be new growth, rebirth.
Yes, and we also, you know, hopefully as we can come together more, a lot of it will have to be outdoors. So it would be lovely to have new growth and new. I'm so glad you both brought up nonfiction, because I'm terrible about nonfiction, but things like crafts and cooking and gardening and doing stuff can be so comforting, and I always forget about that. But it's a nice place to go to let your mind do other things. Or at least if you're like me, who has no crafty skills whatsoever, you read about it and wish you could do something like that, and you dream about it. And the comfort is also about nesting. So you know, I have redesigned my home in a million different ways, not actually doing it, but thinking about it a lot.
Well, I think we also think we tend to get caught up in thinking about nonfiction as being epic tomes about history or all about a famous person, right? But there's so many other types of nonfiction. And, you know, I was thinking also when, like the definition, I think, of comfort books is really also like religious texts and words, like phrases by famous people. Like, I mean, like that's just like things that I think people read for comfort for, I honestly, for millennia, right? Like there's reasons why we house them in our nonfiction section. We all make sure that we have those things.
Of course,
Spirituality.
Spirituality, yeah. I mean, saying, you know, those things makes me think of like, I also for comfort look for sometimes stories that are about problem solvers.
Yes.
And like the first one that popped into my head was the Walter D. Meyer memoir Bad Boy.
Right.
And I mean, he was an amazing person and an amazing writer, and you read about the hardships he had growing up. He also wrote a really good book called, I think it's All the Right Stuff, not the space thing, but but it's about like the social contract and social justice that I find as a very sort of comforting book, which then leads me to nonfiction picture books, which I think can be very comforting too, because you don't have the heavy, I have to get through this, 400-page biography, but I could learn about somebody or something in a much smaller and more visually beautiful place.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I mean, we've got Martin Luther King Day coming up, and Martin's Big Words is one of my favorite picture books of all times, because it's not only about what a remarkable person he was, but it's about words.
Right?
Yeah.
True. It's so true. Well, and Martin Luther King Jr. is definitely somebody I think that we all look to his words for comfort. I mean, how many times have we heard bits and pieces of his speeches reiterated through this past, year? So, yeah. Well, I think we are at our time limit, Ms. SL.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
It's very easy to just keep talking about books. Like, we have so much to say.
I know. Well, and you both are so wonderful and bad for me, because the more you mention books, the more I'm like, oh, and that makes me think of this, and that makes me think of that. So,
which is why this format is wonderful, because then we can talk about it that way.
We may have to have a comfort books part 2.
I'm sure we will need more comfort in the coming months.
We can all wear our stocking caps and drink our tea and coffee and talk comfort, because
I have my tea.
Just finished my tea. This is my water, but it's in a coffee cup. So
I'm drinking coffee, so I'm just getting hyped and less comforty.
What brings you joy, Miss SL? That's what brings you joy.
Right.